and welcome to the podcast. I'm the host, Sean Boyce, and I'd like to welcome my guests to the show today, Patience-Marime Ball, who is the founder and CEO of Women of the World Endowment, and Dr. Ruth Shaber, who's the founder and president of Tara Health Foundation. And they are both co-authors of the book, The XX Edge, Unlocking Higher Returns and Lower Risk. Love the title of that book, and welcome to the show.
Thanks for having us, Sean, for having us.
Yeah, I'm very excited to talk more about the topic that we've got prepared for today. But before we do that, what would be great is for our audience to learn a little bit more about you both. Can we go into your respective backgrounds and how you got to where you are today?
Sure. So this is Ruth, and I'll start. My background is very unusual, given that I've landed in the field of finance. I'm an obstetrician gynecologist, and I had a long career at Kaiser Permanente here in Northern California. And during that career, in addition to being a clinician, I also had many different executive roles at Kaiser. And during my career, I learned how central women are to healthcare decision-making, to the health of their families, and worked in an organization where women and diverse people in general had a lot of leadership roles. I left Kaiser Permanente in 2012 and founded the Tara Health Foundation in 2014 with the intention of continuing a lot of what I learned in my work in healthcare to the fields of philanthropy and impact investing. And much of our work is focused on women, both their reproductive health and their economic health. And we do quite a bit of investing. In fact, 100% of our assets are invested for our mission, which is around gender and also racial equity. And what we do is use our grant capital to help build the field of impact investing and really have a systems engineering approach to both philanthropy and investing. And in that journey, I had the good fortune of meeting Patience about 3 years ago.
Thanks, Ruth. And a little bit about myself, Sean. So I started my professional career at the International Finance Corporation, which is the private sector arm of the World Bank. That was after law school and business school. I have a JD and an MBA. And the first part of my career, actually, I did project finance into power generation assets all over the world. And then moved on to do distressed assets work. So I went from investing power generation assets at the IFC, worked for a little bit in New York for a Japanese bank, doing the same thing, project finance. Then came back to the IFC and moved into distressed assets work, where I was doing restructurings of non-performing portfolios. And then finally, in the final part of my career at the IFC, I moved to the financial markets department, where I did investments into financial institutions around the world, but also into private equity and private equity funds and venture funds as well. In 2008, I was in that role in financial markets when Lehman Brothers fell. And Christine Lagarde was the head of the IMF at the time, said if Lehman Brothers had been Lehman Sisters, things would have been different. I spent the next couple of years really interrogating what would have been different. And this is when the research around how gender diverse teams tend to bring about more resilient companies, companies with better risk infrastructure, and over time, companies that actually outperform was emerging. We noticed that companies with gender diverse teams coming out of that crisis were able to emerge a little quicker relative to their peers. I mean, every company suffered, but those with gender diverse teams on their boards in the C-suite navigated that crisis a little better. I ended up building a platform for the IFC, the International Finance Corporation, that we called Banking on Women, which was a play on words, betting on women while at the same time giving them access to capital. This is now a platform that has provided billions of dollars of capital to women entrepreneurs around the world. We also issued the first ever gender bond and did some exciting things. I left IFC, took early retirement to hang out with my boys because mom had always worked out of a suitcase traveling to other parts of the world, and but was still wanting to stay in the gender diverse space, and ended up as an angel investor. And then in 2018, founded Women of the World Endowment. And I'll say a little bit more about Women of the World Endowment later, but I want to pivot a little bit to how Ruth and I met. We met in 2019. And we had breakfast at a little restaurant in Europe. And Ruth brought her systems map. She had funded this work looking at capital markets and where the potential levers for change could be identified, and where women could become critical players in financial markets. And she and I had that breakfast, and we knew something magical was happening that morning. And we continued to collaborate. And the idea of co-authoring a book came about when we were on a visit to Singapore together, where we were talking to some emerging impact investors who wanted to understand how gender could play in their impact investing. And at this breakfast that we had been invited to, there were women on one side of the table and men on the other side of the table. The women were nodding their heads because the data that we're sharing, they were aware of, but the guys sort of were eating their breakfast and not maybe somewhat disinterested. And Ruth and I looked at each other afterwards and said, we have to write a book to bridge this divide. The men have to recognize that not seeing women as actors and solution drivers and decision makers who can make a financial difference actually misses a whole lot of opportunity. And hence the XX Edge was born.
Thank you both for sharing your collective backgrounds, which are ridiculously impressive, by the way. And I have so many questions, as you might imagine. I'm particularly fond of and I remember that myself as well, too, because I spent quite a large percentage of my career in finance and in particular in fintech. But I remember the Lehman Brothers collapse, and it seemed to happen almost overnight. Like a 140-year-old company just essentially kind of disappeared into thin air, which is ridiculous to consider at this point. It was shocking then. It still is now. So the Lehman Sisters positioning that you just mentioned, I have so many questions about because it sounds super fascinating. And I want to dive into that as well as the book. So can you talk to us a little bit more about I love the title. It's fascinating. I get an idea in terms of what I think is being indicated there, but I'd love for you to describe for us kind of the mission and purpose behind the book, the story that you're intending to tell. And I'd love to dive into anything you have that indicates some of the data and the information that speaks to the opportunity here, because I think it's a fascinating perspective.
Thanks, Sean. And, when we decided that a book needed to be written about the value of gender diversity in investing, we weren't sure what we were going to find. We knew from our personal experience, both Patience and I have had quite a bit of experience as investors and using what has been called a gender lens in making our investment decisions. And we knew that in certain markets and certain types of capital, there was definitely an advantage. But we weren't sure what we were going to find when we started our research. But lo and behold, across every single asset class, whether you're talking about women on boards of public companies or in the C-suite, chief financial officers being female versus male, or entrepreneurs and having gender diverse teams starting companies, or the management of funds that are investing in those companies, venture capital, real estate, debt, all the way down to what people often think about when they think about women in investing in microfinance. Across the board, when there are women involved in the allocation of capital, there is an increased financial performance. And we want to make it clear that we weren't really comparing men to women, although in some cases that is the data that's available. But the consistency was when there's diversity, when there's gender diversity in those decision-making rooms. And so when we were thrilled to see that this data that our experience was panning out in the data and anything that was published, we set out to publish the book, but also to come up with to think about why would this be so? What is it about having women at the table that was making a difference in financial performance? And we think there's three main reasons. One is that women tend to have, no, once again, this is tendencies. This is not absolutes, that there are plenty of men who have these same characteristics, and there's plenty of women who don't. But what we see is that women tend to be more collaborative. They tend to have lower ego. They also tend to analyze risk differently. And we pulled some of our research from the gambling data, and we know that men are much more likely to take risks, to be pressured by their social influences, to gamble, to be more likely to be problem gamblers. And if you think about the types of decisions that boards often make, or particularly startup companies, that there's a lot of risk involved, and women are not averse to risk. They certainly take risks, but they analyze risks differently. And they also tend to be more interested in the long-term outcomes of decisions they make and less influenced by short-term gains. So if you put those tendencies together and bring them into whether it's the boardroom or the C-suite or as founders of a startup company, you tend to get a different approach to the financial decision-making. So those are the basic elements and tendencies that we think are really driving this outsized financial performance when you have diversity in the room.
And maybe I could just add one more thing, Sean, that we also looked at. And well, maybe first I'll start with some supporting data. As Ruth indicated, the data was across asset classes, but also across sectors, and we can talk a little bit more about sectors later. But our research showed that gender-inclusive teams are 21% more likely to see outperformance in profitability relative to their peers. That's a significant number. If you look at startups, when startups have only a single female co-founder, we're not saying only female-founded, startups, but just a single female co-founder, they're 63% more likely to have better performance, more resilient performance, and longevity as well. If you look at the hedge fund industry, which in most instances people think that's high finance, that's really most suitable for guys, but female risk takers in the hedge fund space, there was a study done over a 6-year period that showed a 6% that women-led hedge funds outperformed the average of larger hedge funds by a margin of 6% over a 6-year period. If you look at financial institutions who traditionally, I think until the 1970s, required men to co-sign for women accessing loans. It's kind of funny because when you look at the portfolios of women, desegregated portfolios by gender, you'll notice that women portfolios actually have lower NPLs, lower non-performing loans in them. And so women are better creditors. And so it's the data is exciting. But the other contextual thing that we noted in this book, beyond the 3 characteristics or tendencies that Ruth pointed to, was the fact that if we look around us, women have proximity to a lot of challenges that we facing, whether it's healthcare. The healthcare industry is 70% female, and those are the folks on the front lines of issues. The education space is more than 60% female, and those are the teachers in our classrooms, and so on and so on. In climate change, greater than 50% of food production is by smallholder farmers who are mostly female. So if you just look at these numbers and you look at the different areas of our lives, you see that women have proximity to these challenges, which makes them really incredible solution drivers in those areas. And really, they should be asset allocators into those areas too. And that's the part that we are arguing in this book, that the world is missing on wealth and health for more people when less women are in these rooms.
This is super interesting. And I think Patience, you're referring to Is that the study from my alma mater, the Vanguard group, that you were speaking about? Because I know I had read that, you'd shared that with me, and we'll link to that in the show notes. But I found that to be fascinating, super interesting, and a lot of data and statistics to back up a lot of what you were both discussing here, and speaking to just the size and scale of that opportunity, which I think is probably as part of the both of your respective missions and what you're pursuing, the opportunity to make transformative change here, which I would love to talk a little bit more about in terms of what does the size and scale of that opportunity look like to both of you? What does that transformation start to look like over time? And then what would you expect to be some of the results from, pulling off the theme of this show, right? Scaling that impact over time. Like, what does that look like?
So the couple things, the Vanguard study that you mentioned looked at 2,600 actively managed funds over a 10-year period, and looked at the leadership of those funds, the teams that were managing the investment decisions of those funds. And they categorized them into 4 categories. And the teams that were gender diverse with greater than 50% female outperformed all the other teams, single gender teams and the mixed gender teams that were primarily male, by 47 basis points. And what that means is it's a relatively easy, I'll put easy in quotes, way to screen your portfolio. And if that is something that could be done at scale, where an individual asset owner or an asset manager or you're a big bank and you're recruiting fund managers, if you just start to think about how can I provide leadership and decision making that's more gender diverse, my products are going to outperform. My portfolio is going to outperform. And what are the ramifications of that? What does that mean at scale? Well, it means that women are going to be in a higher demand for those jobs. And women are going into the financial industry. They're graduating at the same rates as men from business schools, but they tend to go into the lower level jobs, or they're more segregated into a niche product. And pulling this talent into mainstream finance where they belong is going to change the markets for everybody. It's going to mean that our systems work more efficiently. It's going to mean that we're going to have to compensate people appropriately for the talent they bring. And so many of the other issues that we care about around pay equity, around the quality of benefits and healthcare that people receive at work, support for children and childcare and the care economy. We really believe that when the right kind of talent is in the room deciding where capital is going to be spent, that so many of those other problems are also going to get solved.
And just to add to what Ruth said, the point I made about more women being on the front lines of a lot of the challenges that we are facing today as a global community, and how that's an opportunity. I think, Sean, the point you made about how can this actually be leveraged for large-scale change, it brings it down to what Ruth and I, love to say, that who allocates capital determines its purpose, and that money can do more than a single dollar can do more than one thing at any given time. It can provide you incredible returns. Ruth just gave the example of the 47 basis points that you can pick up just by picking the right team to manage your assets. But it can also do the right thing by people and planet. What we invest in matters, and what we invest in can give us profits, but can also address some of the challenges that the world faces today, whether it's climate change, healthcare, these pandemics that are coming our way, education, where more people can be educated and be agents of change. So that's the scale of change that can happen, not just at the capital allocation space, but all the other issues that we're dealing with downstream as well.
Thank you both for that perspective and the additional detail. Super helpful. Patience, that last element that you mentioned there as well too, in terms of who moves capital determines its purpose, really starts to speak to what impact at scale could look like here. And Ruth, I know you alluded to this as well also. That is super interesting to me in an area like impact investing, Ruth, which I know you talked about was a big part of your background, is a fascinating world. And I know it continues to develop, but is, I think, particularly interesting I thought about it differently from a perspective of, I think it was a student who had shared this perspective on another podcast I was listening to about impact investing in particular. And it was from the perspective of, a student who is thinking about starting a company and talking about its mission. And the description that was given, which I think was fascinating, was, I don't just want to make money, I want to make a difference, which was a super interesting perspective, in that I think previously it may have been thought of either, chasing whatever area we think we can do business in to make as much money as possible. But sometimes that may have been a sacrifice for what was right or what was best or what made the world a better place or what have you, right? Nowadays, I think what's really interesting and exciting is that conversation is changing in terms of like, all right, well, instead of just cannibalizing everything for maximum dollars or profit, maybe we can also make the world a better place at the same time, which I don't know why it previously had been thought of as mutually exclusive. It doesn't have to be, which is really interesting. And I'm starting to see more of this dialogue, which is why I'm so interested in impact investing. Big part of my background is finance as well, too. That, in addition to everything you're talking about with gender-diverse teams and how that maximizes the kind of results that you can have as well, too, starts to create some really interesting and exciting potential in terms of what we might see moving forward. So I'd love to hear you both speak about that a little bit in terms of how you could see the world of impact investing also taking shape and continuing to be successful as it reaches a different level of scale. Also, as we continue to see better gender diversity, which ultimately leads to better returns where these dollars are being invested.
And thanks for that question. This is Ruth answering first. There's been so much backlash around this notion of ESG, and so political and so unnecessary. And our perspective is that investing in good companies, and you can define good in so many different ways. In our case, we're defining it as good for women or including women in capital allocation. That those types of filters that you might use are actually selecting for the strongest companies and the ones that are going to perform and be the most sustainable. And so whether you care about the climate or poverty alleviation or good quality jobs for the most people, that when you start using those sorts of lenses to evaluate your investment decisions, that you're picking the best companies that are going to give you the returns you want and the social impact that you want. And so I think Patience and I both would love to see this whole notion of impact investing, this categorization that all investments have impact. And it's not just some niche over here. It's every single investment decision you make, every single consumer decision you make, every time you decide what company you're going to work for. Those are all impact investing decisions. And that people clearly want companies to do more than just provide a financial return. And you can decide what that more is. We're not telling you what it is. We happen to have a book full of data that shows you that gender is an incredibly powerful driver of performance. But isn't it great that you also get all this other good stuff?
And just to add to that, Sean, this is the core of Huawei's mission. As I was, growing up in this newfound recognition of women as actors, starting with that, if Lehman Brothers had been Lehman Sisters point that was made in 2008, 2009, I came to the realization that money follows actors and innovators. And until we centralize women as solution drivers, actors, and innovators, that is just going to continue to be a challenge. And so Women of the World Endowment's mission is the fact that we are asset agnostic, we are sector agnostic, but this completely committed to the opportunity of centralizing women as decision makers, as actors. And we know that this actually does drive teams to be more risk aware, to be more long-term viewers of decisions to be more risk aware, and that brings about lower risk and ultimately better performance. And so it's really, and anyone can choose what it is that they want to centralize. For us, we believe that centralizing women just by far is the sort of underappreciated opportunity that can unlock so much wealth and health for so many more people around the world. It's sort of the impact investing secret sauce that that people just haven't realized that they can take advantage of without very much work, actually. And that's the part that's somewhat disappointing. And I know that part of what you focus on, Sean, is fintech specifically. And so I want to fintech and technology and its intersection with financial markets, technology and its intersection with financial markets, which is fintech, I guess that's the definition. One, I just want to name a company that we've invested in it, Women of the World Endowment, and why we invested in it. It's a company called Ethos ESG, to Ruth's point about ESG. We think that this is an emerging asset class that will gain traction. Yes, there's backlash right now, as is expected, but it will gain, momentum will keep moving forward. And centralizing women in how people think about the E, the S, and the G is an opportunity that we don't want to miss. And this company, Ethos ESG, is one that enables investors to not just, divest out of opportunities, but really be more thoughtful about how they invest into companies. And our part in this company, we're an investor. We use the platform for our own portfolio construction, but I also sit on the board where I'm able to figure out how the metrics and the KPIs and the tools that are being developed can centralize the role of women as actors and solution drivers. So this is some of the work that we do, just figuring out where are those leverage points, where are those points of where if you insert a crowbar, and the crowbar itself may be, a small investment, how likely is it that it's going to, cause, fault lines, positive fault lines into the rest of the system?
Thank you both. There's so much context I want to dive into as well, too, with both of what you've had to share. Patience, you talked more about the fintech component in leveraging, impact investing and being a lever for seeing this change at scale, making the world a better place. Really exciting there. The example of Ethos ESG was a great one. I think I'm excited for what's coming from the impact investing, especially around ESG. There's so much potential there. It's a really exciting future. And, big part of my piece, which is the tech and software components in terms of how those can also be used as levers to reach greater scale, help more people. I'm very excited for the innovation that's going to come here. And then Ruth, something that you mentioned as well, too, in terms of seeing all investing as impact investing is an exciting future as well, because that's what I'm hopeful for as well, too, is that I never saw them as needing to be mutually exclusive. And I always thought that there's the potential to both build a great, sustainable, healthy business, but at the same time, make the world a better place, right? I would love to see that continue to become more common, more popular, and almost expected, essentially, at scale. So that's very exciting. I want to thank you both for being here. I could speak to you both about this and so many other topics for so much time. Unfortunately, we will essentially wrap up this episode, but I would love to have you both back to continue to talk about this mission and all the important work that you're doing. But before we wrap this episode, I have a few other questions for you that I want to make sure I get an opportunity for you both to speak to the respective mission of your organizations, especially for our listeners and anybody who's consuming this content, like what they can know about how they can help and or get involved, as well as anything else that you'd like to mention where folks can go to learn more and, also get involved.
So this is Ruth. The work that we're doing in promoting the book, The XX Edge, Unlocking Higher Returns and Lower Risk, is leading us to think about what's the actual movement that how do we actually influence the financial markets to embrace this approach to gender diverse investing. And we actually identified one of the key drivers to be the amount of assets under management that are managed by diverse teams, not just the number of people in the seats. And historically, that's been a great goal, is to, for instance, increase the number of women on boards to 30%, or to think about leadership teams as being having numbers of women. But it's actually the dollars that they manage that is the most important driver. And so we are going to be launching a campaign to try and increase the assets that are managed by gender diverse teams to 33%. And we'd like to do that by 2033. And keeping in mind that right now, the percentage is probably around 1%. So we've got a little ways to go, but we know that the talent is out there. So you can look for our campaign. We're calling it 33 by 33. And you can reach out to us at the XX Edge website, and certainly look for me on LinkedIn.
And as far as Women of the World Endowment is concerned, it is a partner to this campaign. The work that we do is to create proof points. And so Women of the World Endowment is actually a C3. We structured it as a C3, which gives our capital incredible flexibility, and our team the opportunity to embrace complexity. And so we are creating proof points in the for-profit space through our investments. We invest across the capital spectrum, all the way from public equities to small seed capital in startups. But we also leverage catalytic capital to bring about an opportunity for data aggregation, for data analytics, for leveraging data to actually translate it into investable strategies, but to also just find the opportunity to remove the friction out of the plumbing of financial markets. And so that's part of the work that we're doing, which is complementary to this campaign that we are embarking on, the 33 by 2033 campaign.
Fantastic. I'm very excited for that. And as progress continues there, obviously, let's talk about meeting again to go over kind of updates in terms of what realizing the results from that campaign look like. And thank you again, both, for being here. I want to make sure I get the best way to reach out and establish contact with you for any of our listeners as well, too. Ruth, I think you mentioned LinkedIn, but please let me know if that's correct. And then Patience, I'd love to hear the same on your end.
So more information on Women of the World Endowment can be found at womenoftheworldendowment.org, our website. And also my LinkedIn, Patience-Marime Ball is my LinkedIn name. And I look forward to getting invitations and getting connected to more people.
Thank you, Patience. And Ruth, would LinkedIn be the best way to reach out to you as well?
Yes, that would be the best.
Perfect. I can't thank you both enough for being here and sharing your incredible knowledge and experience with both myself and our audience. Very excited for the work that you're doing and the results as well. So thank you again.
Thank you, Sean. And we look forward to our next conversation with you.
Very good.
Thank you very much, Sean.
Bye-bye.